Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 16.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Kendra Brooks. Denise Clay Murray and I will discuss the impending appointment of a new police commissioner, and Lance Haber and I will discuss the recent Pennsylvania Society meeting, which incidentally does not happen in Pennsylvania. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. And spoiler alert, I don't have any reviews on the food that was served at the 36 private invitation only get-togethers. So we don't know if it's caviar or shrimp or crab or filet mignon, and we don't know which one had the best food. But I did notice there was no McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken being served.
I don't think so. And we were not invited, Lance.
And if we had been, we wouldn't have gone.
No.
So just as well. Glad they didn't waste the paper.
Right. So we're going to, and people, if they haven't seen your piece in yesterday's newsletter, they should definitely check it out. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the third of the show tonight. So, but what we're going to lead off with is an interview we did with Councilmember Kendra Brooks, where we talk a little bit about what her policy goals are for the upcoming council. And we talk a little bit about her election victory and her bringing Nicholas O'Rourke with her in the council and what that could mean. So here's our interview with Councilmember Kendra Brooks. All right, Councilmember Kendra Brooks, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about the 2023 campaign and how you and Nicholas O'Rourke won this election and will be joining council?
So this 2023 campaign, we knew that we had to implement some of our strategy from 2019 and build upon that. We knew that, our winning strength was making sure that we use our organizing skills to make sure we bring more folks into the voting poll. I think with us having opposition from both Democrats and Republicans, it was important for us to create or expand the current voting base to include young people, folks that like not the usual suspects. Like we knew that winning wouldn't be the typical ward leader committee person strategy, that we had to tap into impacted folks in communities around the city, as well in our traditional progressive, left-leaning base that we have with Working Families Party. And Working Families Party State Committee consists of community-based organizations and service sector unions who also are part of the fold to help build what our field strategy would look like, and invest time and money into that.
What does it mean to have another member of the Working Families Party on council with you?
Wow. I'm already so excited. I think when I think of in terms of we're going to talk about this plan for working families, like I have someone to build upon a plan around the things we want to move forward in Philadelphia in a different way. Regardless of having allies, it's very different to have someone of your same party that we ran together as a slate to come in office for us to implement what we talked about on the campaign trail. So I think it means that we'll be able to, move more, expand our agenda and move more things through council. Because I know my staff appreciates having another team to work with. Although we work very closely with, our Democratic allies, having another Working Families Party partner will definitely increase our ability to get more done. And I'm excited about that.
And speaking of getting more done, you have put out a very ambitious plan, the plan for Philadelphia families. I attended an event about a month or so ago, community sort of workshopping event around, I think, the housing part of this plan. It was very encouraging, very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that plan and, what you're well, first of all, just tell us a little bit about
Okay, so with the plan, we pull together existing plans in the city because in my first year, we had multiple plans that were launched in the city. So we pulled together those plans as well as other plans around public safety, housing, an environment, uh, healthcare, and wanted to kind of pull together a comprehensive plan on how we can implement things that are already moving in the city, program services that are already in the city, and expand upon them to tap on some of the things that we need to accomplish over the next 4 years. And to your point, yes, it is ambitious, but it has to be because the crisis that we're in, they need fresh eyes and immediate solutions. And I think with the plan, uh, it kind of gives us an opportunity to funnel what comes across our office into it. Because in my first year, I had like this vision of all the things we wanted to do, and everything that came our way, we tried to do it, which was a lot, and we did a lot.
it.
So I said, let's formulate this into a plan so we can strategize around getting things done. And what you attended was the 5 pillars. I thought it was important that we include the community in those conversations. So each pillar, we wanted to host it in a different community around the city, invited 2 community members to get their feedback on the plan, and making sure that where I am, where my team is, that we're including the voices of everyday people that are impacted um, by the things that are in a pillar, but also that have a different experience than we do. So I think so far we've done the school district for the education piece, and we've done housing, and we have 3 more, but I think we're going to also redo those 2 as well because those are um, some of the most talked about issues in the city. And I want to make sure that we have opportunity to get as much feedback as possible. So when we start rolling out supporting legislation, um, or advocating for supporting legislation, because some of our advocacy may be at the state level,
Hmm.
we have as much feedback as possible.
And, and what it sounds like is the plan isn't exactly set in stone. You're open to adjustments and,
Yes.
yeah,
But
and
it has
that
to
makes,
be. This is government.
that's right.
It's not my way or the highway. It's like what's best for the people.
Right. So is this basically your blueprint for the next 4 years, what you're going to be focusing on?
Yes.
Hmm. Okay. And I would recommend people look at this because it's really interesting, and it's some things we've talked about and maybe some things that people aren't really familiar with. That might be something to think about and be some really interesting ideas. Looking at some of the ideas now, do you think that even though we're in a very early place with the plan, that there's some early support for some of these initiatives?
Yeah, I think we started shopping it around, but everybody was in election mode.
Right.
Um, and I think our goal is to connect with both council and some of our statewide colleagues around their areas of interest. So it's not like I have to do it. It's more like this is what needs to be done. So if you notice when we did our first 2 sessions, our education session, we did in partnership with Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. Our housing section we did in partnership with Jamie Gautier. And we're trying to plan all of our next couple of series in the same manner to make sure it's not just my plan. It's a
Hmm.
plan that we can move forward on together. And like you said, it's ambitious. So this is not like one piece of legislation. It's multiple packages of legislation around various issues that impact our city. And I can't do it by myself. I am an organizer. Folks like to call me a consensus builder. I wanted to use this as something that we can talk about and move forward over the next 4 years.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about you and your 3 other freshman colleagues is you did not have what I would call a typical first term. Pandemic, a long list of things. Now that you're moving into your second term, it's going to be a little different too, because we're talking about new administration, new council. Is there anything specific that you're doing to prepare to build those relationships? Are some of those relationships already cemented? How do you sort of work that angle of it to adjust to the new people you're going to be working with?
Um, well, I have a good relationship with both of my colleagues. Like I definitely come from the world, agree to disagree. Like
Hmm.
we don't agree on this issue, let's move on to the next. There are other things that we can work on. I'm looking forward to some of the newer colleagues coming on board because I can see how their ideology fits right into the plan for Philadelphia families. So I'm excited about that. Continue to work with the 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 four that came in with me. I guess we're now the sophomore four. First we were the freshman four, so I guess we're the sophomore four. Um, and I think the interesting thing that three of us are now on leadership,
Hmm.
which kind of strengthens our ability to move some things along. So I'm very excited what can happen over the next 4 years. Um, and I think like in our first term is like getting to know the administration. If we're gonna have this is gonna be getting to know the administration 2.0. Because I don't
Hmm.
know, staying a lot of the folks we worked with are leaving. I think everyone that we worked with around housing issues has retired.
Hmm.
So it's gonna be very interesting. I'm cautiously optimistic.
All right. I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, council member. How are you?
I'm well.
So I guess my first question for you is, and this takes us back to the election a little bit. You for the Working Families Party to beat a minority party in council, you had to beat out the Republicans and to an extent, as you mentioned, the Democratic Party. Were you surprised at how hard the Democratic Party in particular came at you? Because the Republicans you kind of suspected were like, okay, well, you're not, different enough. And that was the argument they made. But were you surprised that the Democrats came at you the way they did?
Um, a little, but I think the realization that people fear change. And I think Working Families Party as a political party, having two seats on council and the willingness to be able to challenge the status quo in a way that they didn't have to be challenged before, um, brings fear and people are, scared of change. Um, and I think when I first run, I think they felt it was a fluke, like it wasn't really going to happen, or that once I won, you know, I wasn't going to be able to govern and get things done. And I think the fear came that we were able to do that. We won one seat in 2019. Over the last 4 years, I worked really hard in kind of doing what I said I was going to do, building off the things that I campaigned on. And we had some tremendous wins for working people in the city. And going into 2023, I have a solid track record. I've built relationships across the aisle. And when I say across the aisle, I'm talking about with the chamber, with my Republican colleagues, like all of the folks that we need to work with in order to get things done. And we did it in a way that I'm respected. And fear of change is a real thing. It was easy if we didn't do what we said we were going to do in our first term, but we did. And now in 2023, with both Nick and I on council, we have an opportunity to do so much more. And I think that's the fear.
Now, Nick is a minister. And sometimes council will make a minister say stuff that ministers don't say because it's profanity. But what have you told him about council and your experience, to kind of get him ready for this?
Oh, I've told him a lot, but what I'm going to share is uh, Nick is better at this than me. I think his spirituality keeps him grounded in a different way.
Mhm.
He keeps me from cussing, as I always say. Um, and I think he has the right character uh, for this job. One of the things I did tell him is like, don't take it personal. and focus on your purpose for being here. And that's what keeps me grounded. Like, just don't take it personal, because he's a very kind, loving spirit. However, this is a place that you can't take it personal. And I think that he'll do well. He'll probably use far less curse words than I do.
Now, today, the mayor-elect is going to be announcing her intergovernmental committee at City Hall. It's a group of folks that are supposed to work. It's like state folks and local folks, and everybody's supposed to, work to do things intergovernmentally. From what I understand, you're not a part of that group, but if you had any advice for them in terms of what you see, that from not being a Democrat or not being a Republican, from being third party, what would that advice be?
I think don't forget what the impact will be on people. A lot of times we get in this room, it's all numbers, statistics. And when it's numbers and statistics, you forget that all of those are attached to a living being. And I think that's one of the main things that I found in a lot of these conversations that I've been in. I was like, I hear what you're saying. It's easy to talk about poverty, housing, gun violence when it's just a number or a percentage. The reality is, let's talk about it like it's your brother and sister. Those numbers have to, translate into humanity in order for us to accomplish what we need to accomplish, but we need to make sure we're accomplishing it for the people that we need to impact. And a lot of times when it's just a number and a percentage, it just it's not the same. And I think that's kind of how we got to where we are. Like 26% of people live in poverty. That's not much. It's less, it's less than half. But if you think of the number of actual children in a public school that it impacts, the number of seniors and families that are living in deep poverty, it sits different. So I hope that they stay focused on the greater purpose of all of Philadelphians and not leaving out those that are most impacted and marginalized as we move forward with the city.
Now, my last question centers on last Thursday's council session. You were one of two legislators that voted against the ski mask ban. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why you made that decision. And, because me personally, I have issues with Jesus is coming, look busy legislation. Meaning that, if you're going to put something out there, how about if it actually is meaningful and not just, it looks good. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why you made the decision you did on this particular bill.
Okay, so the bill sponsor and I had several conversations about this, and he was very clear on how I felt about it. Number one, being a mother of young people that are caught up in fashion trends, even though they're daughters. A part of my blended family, I have, sons and non-gender conforming young folks that see this as a trendy thing to do. And I can only imagine what the implementation of something like this would look like for young people who are already criminalized just by being. As we come into the winter months, we don't know what to expect. And it's kind of scary for me to just imagine that the perceived threat of a mask could have me having a deep conversation if one of my children are arrested or detained or further traumatized by, just being stopped by a police officer. I think for me, there's like this, the trauma associated with being stopped by a police officer for Black folks. Why would we put something in place that puts them at more risk and at harm. And it criminalizes the whole concept of a face mask. There are people that are bike messengers. There are folks that, what about young boys coming from playing football? They wear those masks underneath their helmets. Like, who's going to differentiate between whether you committed or a crime or didn't? What about people visiting the city that wear the ski mask to stay warm and walk through there? If there's a Black or brown person, they have more than likely to be associated with being criminalized than any other folks. So it's all these unintended consequences. I just couldn't in good faith vote yes, and how are we going to implement that? Like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, pick which group of young men in Black masks are criminals and which ones are not. So we're going to stop all 10, traumatizing 10 young people, and none of them could be the perpetrator, furthering disrupting the relationships between police and young people in our city. Like, it makes me really emotional thinking about it, because, I come out of a generation where stop and frisk was real. And I'm not afraid to share, as safe as I felt driving in my car right now as a 52-year-old woman. I'm 50 something. I don't remember what the number is after 50. I'm safe because I have MG tags. Because I've been pulled over for like random stops because, whatever, my tag wasn't right or my light was out, and just the fear on me and my children around that's long lasting. Right? Not been arrested, just a whole concept and what that does for Black people. And I just couldn't in good faith vote yes to that. Like I said, we had a long conversation. I told him I would think about it, but I can't see how I don't understand the implementation. I don't understand how, it will be enforced. I don't understand how young people will know that it's even a law. I actually did hear it on the radio the other day. Someone said that I hope young folks know that they're having a face mask is now against the law in Philadelphia. I actually heard it on the radio, but it wasn't like a public service announcement. It didn't, the way it was said, it wasn't like I'm supporting this law. It was more like, to my point, young folks not understanding that they're being criminalized once again for just being. And I still feel very strongly about that. I couldn't in good faith support that. And I do understand the sponsor's intent. But I in good faith couldn't do that. I couldn't look my kids in the face and go home and said I voted yes to that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Council Member. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn. And you're still listening to Hall Monitor on 106.5 WPPN.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And Councilmember Brooks, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. You have a great day.
You too. All right. We'd like to thank Councilmember Brooks for joining us on the program. And now, Denise Clay Murray couldn't be here with us tonight, so we pre-recorded a segment this morning about the impending new police commissioner. So here is Denise Clay Murray and I discussing that this morning. All right, Denise. So a couple weeks ago, Mayor-elect Cheryl Parker made her first major appointment. Mm-hmm. It's the appointment we expected to be first, and we thought, is one of the most important she'll make, and that's the new police commissioner. Mm-hmm. It will be Kevin Bethel from the school district. He was the security chief for the school district. He had been a police officer. Mm-hmm. So what are you hearing about this, and what do you make of this appointment?
Well, it seems to be an appointment that everybody's encouraged by. What I always notice at these announcements when it's the new police commissioner, and for some reason, every mayor since Michael Nutter has had like police commissioner as their first hire. What I've noticed is that usually you have like the president of the NAACP, which in this case is Kathy Hicks, publisher of the Philadelphia Sunday Sun, one of the many papers in the city I write for. And on the other hand, you have the president of the Fraternal Order of Police. Normally that person is John McNesby, who is kind of gruff, who was kind of gruff, for want of a better way to put it, and was commonly seen as an impediment to any kind of reform of the police department. In this case, there's a new gentleman who's the head of the FOP, a gentleman named Roosevelt Ponder, who has actually consented to sit down with us at some point here on Hall Monitor, which I doubt we would have ever gotten McNesby to do that. But usually when they have these announcements, one person, they're both happy to start, and how the police commissioner's reign goes will depend on whether or not they're both happy in the future. What I liked about this particular announcement is that the new president of the FOP spoke out in support of not only Kevin Bethel, who he's known for years and has worked with for years, because at one point Bethel was the deputy commissioner in charge of operations, which meant he had to directly work with the president of the FOP. He also pledged his support to Mayor-elect Parker. And I don't remember seeing John McNesby and Jim Kenney in the same room the entire time that Kenney has been mayor. So that's a good start. One of the things that might encourage people when it comes to Bethel is the fact that he has worked extensively with keeping young people out of jail. He's done a lot of programming. He was a Stoneleaf Foundation fellow that was looking into ways to, keep young people out of the criminal justice system. But on the other hand, you had a lot of folks, particularly suburban police chiefs that the Inquirer interviewed, after his appointment, that said, yay, we won't have any more lawlessness coming out of Philadelphia. Now, what cracks me up with that is that sometimes, suburban lawlessness comes to Philadelphia, starts some trouble, and Philly gets blamed for it. But that's something to watch, because, what my personal experience in terms of dealing with law enforcement, and covering law enforcement is, if the suburbs are happy with your police chief here in Philadelphia, chances are really good the Philadelphians are probably not going to be after a while. But, we shall wait and see exactly what happens with Kevin Bethel's administration. But it seemed from being at the announcement that, all of the people who are usually, going to get involved in this particular space seem to be happy with the appointment. And that's important.
Right. One of the things that we've heard, anecdotally, is no one really has a problem with this pick.
Right.
Even people who are school district watchers have said, well, no, we've never had a problem with him, And it almost seems a little unusual that there's so many people who either are supportive or neutral. I haven't heard very many people, quite frankly, Denise, I don't know anybody who's against this pick.
Right.
So that's strange.
In that regard. He's a unicorn in that regard.
Yeah.
Because even Richard Ross, who was the first commissioner that Jim Kenney picked, you had people in the room, like you had the police, you had the FOP president, and you had the president of the NAACP at the time, and they were both happy with the pick. But what we ended up finding out, and why Ross ended up leaving the job, was that he had problems dealing with sexual harassment, particularly sexual harassment pertaining to a former paramour of his that just happened to file a sexual harassment suit that she felt he was slow walking because she had ended their relationship. Mm-hmm. So so far nothing like that has jumped out of the trees for Kevin Bethel, and hopefully it won't, because there needs to be some stability in that position right now, especially since you've got a whole lot of things being discussed regarding criminal justice that, if not handled exactly right, can end up costing the city millions of dollars in police harassment lawsuits.
Yep. And it's probably a little too early to tell, but are people thinking that there are going to be mass changes in the police department? What does this a Bethel administration of the police department kind of look like?
Well, no one quite knows that yet, because he has to put together his crime and safety plan and give it to the mayor-elect, and they have to sit down and hash that out. But one thing that everybody can pretty much count on is that stop and frisk will be a part of that plan. So so-called Terry stops will be a part of that plan. What I'm interested in seeing is what he's going to do the minute that, and when I wrote my column last week about the ski mask bill, I mentioned that the Philadelphia Police Department still has a pretty significant knucklehead contingent. What is going to be interesting to see is how Bethel handles that knucklehead contingent when it comes to stop and frisk, when it comes to the ski mask ban, when it comes to those things, because, sure, you are constitutionally allowed to do that, but there is a way that you have to do it so you don't end up in court. Like, there has to be an actual offense that you think is about to be committed or has been committed. You can't just roll up on people because you're having, because you feel like it, and stop and frisk them or pull them over or whatever. And it's going to be where the rubber's going to meet the road is how Bethel handles those situations, how he handles those police officers that are part of the police department's knucklehead contingent, and whether or not he is allowed to do what Charles Ramsey, the former commissioner, who's also his mentor and was part of the selection committee for the police commissioner. What's going to be interesting is to see if he's going to be able to do what Ramsey was able to do, which was to actually get police officers who were members of the knucklehead contingent out of the police department, because that's been hard to do.
How much influence, because we talk about crime a lot, how much influence can a police commissioner have over the actual reduction of crime throughout the city?
That's a good question, because whether or not the police commissioner has any influence at all, he or she is going to get blamed if the crime goes up, or they're going to be praised if the crime goes down. It could just be another preponderance of factors, like more people becoming employed, guns getting taken off the street, folks just having a better day and not, going out and committing crime. That a lot of that stuff is incidental, but the police commissioner is often blamed or praised for whether or not crime goes up or down. Now, what's going to be interesting is how Kevin Bethel navigates that, navigates it in a direction, navigates crime in such a direction that it ends up going in his favor, which would be for it to go down. It's also going to be interesting to see how crime is covered by the media in Bethel's administration, because it seemed to me, and it still seems to me, that for some reason, Philadelphia's television stations have gone on a straight "if it bleeds, it leads" thing.
Yeah.
And I understand you have to cover those things, but there is a certain amount of harm, and it's fairly egregious harm that comes when you cover crime that way. The Institute for Better Gun Violence Reporting recently did a training with a bunch of reporters. I was part of that training, where we talked about better ways to cover gun violence in a way that doesn't continue to traumatize victims. And one of the things that we talked about is the fact that, if it leads coverage, basically traumatizes victims. And it's going to be interesting to see if the goodwill that Kevin Bethel has built up over the years with a variety of groups, including the media, actually extends to how crime is not only covered but perceived in the city. Because you have people who are under this impression that basically Philadelphia is the wild, wild west. And if you're walking down to the corner store to grab a quart of milk, you're not going to make it back to your house because you're going to get shot. And while there have been incidents where that has happened, they're a lot fewer and farther between, sorry, than a lot of people want to think. And it'll be interesting to see how Kevin Bethel and how he conducts himself influences that narrative.
So we brought up the ski mask bill from last week. You and I were both at council, and a couple of times I think you and I glanced at each other, wondering kind of what was happening. And we both can talk about this. What is your take on the bill and its potential effectiveness?
Well, this is a piece of what I call Jesus is coming, look busy legislation.
Yeah.
Because, I understand that, you have people who see folks, that just happen to be wearing a ski mask when they commit a crime. And you want that to stop. But we have never, ever successfully dealt with crime by criminalizing clothing. No. That has never been successful. And the thing is, there is a lot about this bill that people have not thought out. One of the things that they have not thought out is what happens when some kid goes into a rec center after coming in from the cold, because we're supposed to be getting a whole lot of snow this year.
Yeah.
And because we're supposed to be getting a whole lot of snow this year, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let my my eyelids get frostbitten, so I'm not seen as committing a crime.
Yeah.
And you're going to have some kid coming into a city rec center to play basketball, and he's going to just happen to have his ski mask on so the bottom of his face doesn't freeze off. And he's going to get hit with a $250 fine that he or she cannot afford to pay. And no one has worked out what happens when that happens, because when you don't pay a fine, and I know this because I have had issues with that in the past, the police issue a warrant for your arrest. And when they see you or they pull you over when you're driving or anything, they tend to take you into custody because not paying a fine is a crime. And I don't think that folks are taking into consideration that this particular piece of legislation is going to be enforced the most in the communities that can afford it the least. If you're, a kid and mom and dad are barely keeping a roof over your head and food in your stomach and the lights on, the last thing that you can afford is a $250 hit. And the fees that go with it if you do not pay it by a certain time. So we're going to have issues where kids are going to end up having to spend time in the Youth Study Center because they didn't take their face mask off before they went into the rec center. And while I understand the point of the bill, I understand that the point is that particularly, senior citizens probably in Councilman Anthony Phillips' district have told them that they want the ski masks gone and stuff. I understand that, but I don't think that they thought out all the consequences. And I also don't think that this bill was at all necessary, because what we need now here in the city is like actual things that will solve the problem of gun violence and crime, not Jesus is coming, look busy legislation that gets you on the front page and gets you on Fox News and makes you, the darling of the Law and Order set, but doesn't really have any benefit to the people in the city that you're legislating on behalf of.
Well, that and, Councilmember Kendra Brooks brought up a very good point. It was something I'd been thinking about even before the meeting. What happens if a kid doesn't even know this is a law?
Exactly.
And a police officer says you have to take that mask off, and he says, no, why would I have to do that? Then what happens? Does the kid get arrested? And then there's a fine on top of that. I think that's much more likely than stopping a crime, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, because there's a whole, like I said, there's a whole lot of moving pieces to this legislation that are going to trip up kids. And I don't think the folks thought this completely out. I thought, there are certain things you shouldn't do as a gut reaction. And one of them is creating legislation. We've talked about the crime bill of 1994 a lot on this program, particularly how it created mass incarceration in a lot of ways. That was one of those from the gut pieces of legislation. And I understand the circumstances. You had a crack epidemic that was going nuts. You had people who were literally, killing each other for territory. So something had to be done. And I get that. But you had to, if you're going to create legislation that, to solve a problem like that, you have to think everything out. And I don't mean just going to the law department and saying, can we do this? Is this constitutional? You also have to think of the long-term consequences of it. And in terms of the 1994 crime bill, you have an entire generation of Black and brown young men who can't get a student loan to go to school, who can't, access public housing, who can't do a variety of things because they have a they have a felony conviction for crack. And usually the rock of crack that they were convicted on was maybe this big. And you have people who are currently in jail and have been for most of the 90s and most of the 2000s, again, over rocks this big. But what people need to understand is that there are certain pieces of legislation that you really shouldn't just get from your gut. And I get the feeling that this is going to end up being one of those gut pieces of legislation that in the end is going to have some unintended consequences, and that are going to be counterproductive to what it was supposed to, the problem it was supposed to solve.
Yeah. And that is something we see all too often with these pieces of criminal justice legislation. So hopefully Councilmember Phillips will come on and talk to us a little bit about it. We can hear a little bit more of his reasoning and maybe get some of those answers to some of the questions we've asked here. So we hope that happens soon. Denise, thank you as always. You're the best. And we will see you live next week on the show.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank Denise as always for being here. We'll see her again next week. And now, Lance, something the annual Pennsylvania Society event occurred over the last weekend. This happens, I believe, every year. Again, we were not invited, and it is important to note that this does not happen. The Pennsylvania Society does not happen in Pennsylvania. It happens in New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
So the Pennsylvania Society is really a get-together of the rich and the powerful, those aspiring to be rich and powerful, elected officials and those aspiring to be elected officials, and lobbyists who make a living by connecting the rich and the powerful to the lobbyists. The thing that you mentioned, Larry, is a place to start. The Pennsylvania Society, who is it? Where does it meet? So if you can pull up the first slide, that'd be great. So they had the 125th annual dinner of the Pennsylvania Society, and it was at one of the most expensive hotels in the nation, the Hilton Midtown Hotel in New York City, New York, in Manhattan. Just so we understand what the price is, in case anyone was thinking, boy, next year I'd really like to take a dinner in New York City and catch a show. One ticket is $878. Now, if you want to move up to the balcony, they're a little cheaper. And if you're under 35, they're a little cheaper. But the way it normally works is what they call a patron, meaning someone who wants to impress, inspire, do something nice for, curry favor with somebody else, buys a table of 10 for $8,780. And then they can give out the tickets. Now, I will just mention what's one of the things that's very sad about this is that price for the rich and the powerful, for the elected officials, is really not that much. While for most of us, it's an incredible amount for one meal, $870 for one meal is really incredibly expensive. In terms of the world of fundraisers, it's not unusual to see a $2,500, $5,000, even $25,000 a person per plate dinner to raise money. And one of the ways we know that these people don't represent us is just to ask a very simple question. Do you know anybody who's ever gone to a $25,000 per plate dinner to fundraise? And if you do, then maybe you can say it's normal people. But I think most of us have never seen that. The Pennsylvania Society holds itself out as this institution that does good work. But if we take a second to look at who funds it, I think we're going to find a very different institution. It's funded by Independence Blue Cross, Jefferson Hospital, Erie Insurance, a number of other corporations. So this is who pays the money for that hotel, for the dinners, and they underwrite all the costs of that. Now, the Pennsylvania Society does do some good work. We haven't seen who they're giving their money to this year, but last year, for example, while they were collecting all this money from corporations, they did give money to a food bank. While none of the corporations and none of the Pennsylvania Society donated any money to any group that was trying to raise the minimum wage, they did take some of the money and give it away to a food bank. They did not announce this year what they were doing with all the leftovers from the dinner and from the 35 other dinners by invite only. They didn't say whether they're taking the leftovers and donating them to a food pantry or whether they were giving out doggy bags so the elected officials on their way out of these places could give it to the homeless people as they were going back to Philadelphia or Erie or Scranton or whatever part of Pennsylvania they came from. So they do some good work. By the way, they also give away 4 scholarships. Of course, they don't fund any organization that wants to make college affordable for everyone, and they certainly don't fund any organization that wants to do away with college debt. But they do give away 4 scholarships. Not a single one of the scholarships is enough to cover the cost of 4-year school at any Pennsylvania school, let alone any private elite university. So why, I think most of us would be kind of curious, well, why do they meet in New York City? I mean, why don't they take Pennsylvania money, I don't know, meet in Erie, Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, or Scranton, or Wilkes-Barre, Altoona, someplace in Pennsylvania where the money could at least partly recirculate in our economy? And it's not without reason to ask that question. 125 years of rich people going to New York. Why not have it here? And when Governor Rendell was the governor, former Governor Rendell was the governor, he actually said, we ought to hold it here. And the Pennsylvania Society rejected that. And just this year, former Governor Rendell commented on that. And I'm going to read it because I think this really explains it. This comes from the Philadelphia Inquirer article. Former Governor Ed Rendell said in the video that he made for the dinner, he tried to bring the annual weekend back to Pennsylvania when he was in office, but realized that leaving the state had its advantage. We all lose, this is a quote, we all lose something, Rendell said, adding that the lack of home field advantage for any Pennsylvania leader makes everyone be more frank, be more honest, and more forthcoming. Now that translates very simply into saying our elected officials and lobbyists and the rich and powerful want to have conversations where nobody hears what they're saying. And there's a reason for that. This last round, one of the things that happened is one of the candidates for United States Senate went to the business leaders at a private by invitation only dinner. And it was the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. And he actually was saying, look, inflation has nothing to do with corporate profits, has nothing to do with the salaries of CEO, has nothing to do with the corporations buying back their stock, or nothing to do with the corporations outsourcing the jobs from the United States and sending them to China or sending them to some other place where they actually continue to use slave labor. And I'm going to pause there and just remind people, as hard as it is to believe, our government and the United Nations all say that slave labor is still used in certain parts of the world. This is not just paying people next to nothing. This is slave labor. So in private, this candidate says, with all due respect, it's not greedflation that causes inflation. It's not the CEOs. It's not their policies. It's bad government policies. That's what he says in private. But if you go to this candidate's webpage and you read what he says to the public, to us, because he wants our votes, he wants their money, but he wants our votes. So in public, he says, we need to stop investing in China, restore American self-sufficiency by helping move medical, pharmaceutical, and other critical supply chains out of China and bringing manufacturing jobs back home to the Commonwealth. That's what he says to people he hopes vote for him. But the people he hopes will write checks for his campaign, he says, it's nothing that you do that causes inflation. It's nothing that you do that harms the economy. It all has to do with poor public policy. So I think once we recognize how two-faced someone can be, it's easy to understand why he wants to be able to say those things in private where nobody's going to hear him. And by the way, we were very fortunate to have a few people who reported back to us and got a small taste of some of what was being said. Now, the public dinner that we talked about, where it's $875 for a seat, a little cheaper if you're willing to sit in the balcony, a little cheaper if you're under 35, and for most people free because someone buys a table and gives away the tickets. But that really isn't the important events. The important events are the private parties where the deals are made, where we had a candidate secretly say in private, it's not the corporation's fault that people are struggling, and then publicly say it is the corporation's fault that they've moved jobs to China. So here's a partial list of all the private parties that someone could be invited to. And it's not just one side or the other. Everybody gets invited, and it doesn't really matter whether the elected official or the candidate represents a progressive left-wing ideology or represents a right-wing pro-corporate social Darwinist view of the world. They all get invited and they all go. State Senator Saval was in the Philadelphia Inquirer complaining that he was being shut out of one of these private parties. And, they eventually let him in. As the person who was running the party said, the law firm sponsoring the party spends a lot of money lobbying, and they're not in the habit of making enemies of the people they lobby. So they, of course, let him in. why Senator Saval wanted to be with the rich and famous and have private conversations with them, he doesn't explain in the article, but he does complain bitterly that he was not allowed in one of the fanciest rooms in New York City, a room called the Rainbow Room, to be fed and given drinks. But here, you can look, the J.P. Morgan breakfast, the Pennsylvania Bipartisan House and Senate Leaders Breakfast, the GOP Commonwealth Club, the Bipartisan Cocktail Reception, the Rosen Law Firm Reception. These are all the private clubs. I'm sorry, all the private dinners and breakfasts where the elected officials and the lobbyists get to hear what the rich and powerful are saying privately, where they don't have to talk in code words, where they don't have to worry about being accused of being anti-working people or racist or homophobic. They can have all these private conversations where no one's going to be able to record what they're saying, with rare exceptions. Every now and then something leaks out. Now, who is the Pennsylvania Society, and how do they manage to control this so well? Because if you look at their pictures, the pictures look pretty amazing. It looks multiracial, certainly looks like it's women and men. So how do they get away with this? How is it that this is what happens? Well, the first thing is Pennsylvania Society controls very strongly who becomes a member. You can't just join. The only way you can join is if two people who have been members for at least 3 years, invite you to join. So they're very selective. If I wanted to join to move the dinner to Philadelphia or Erie or Altoona, I wouldn't be allowed to be a member. Somebody has to want me to be a member before I can do it. And again, who goes? Right-wing pro-corporate politicians go, left-wing progressive politicians go, lobbyists go, and the rich and powerful go. It's one of those rare instances where it's so clear what's going on that it's amazing that it's accepted. Rich people throw parties for candidates and elected officials where the lobbyists get to work them over. And it doesn't matter what the elected officials' policies are. It doesn't matter whether they're progressives or pro-corporatists. They all get invited and they all get to go and ask for campaign contributions going forward. And the lobbyists and the rich and powerful get to say, well, here's what we're interested in. And if you're interested in what we're interested in, then we're interested in making sure you get elected. Now, to me, it seems wrong. Clearly, there's something wrong with this. But they don't even have to report it. So Hall Monitor asked the question of the executive director of the Philadelphia Ethics Board. Is there anything wrong with elected officials going to these private clubs, private meetings, private dinners, feeding at the trough, getting meals, getting drinks, and being feted? And the answer was shocking. He wrote, I can't offer any comment about the Pennsylvania Society event, but I can give you information about the gift disclosure rules. The general rule on the disclosure of gifts is that a city form filer must disclose the source, value, and circumstances of anything of value they receive without paying full price if the total value from that source is $200 during the reporting year. From my research, not a single elected official who attended the dinner reported on their ethics form that they got anything over $200. Now, of course, if you go to multiple parties, maybe you get a couple $1,000s worth of gifts, but it's hard to know whether any one gift was $200. Now, I did ask the question, was any board member from the Ethics Society, from the Ethics Committee, did any of them go? And the answer I got, and they were very polite about it, was said, the executive director said, I don't have any information about that. I don't know whether any of our board members went. The Committee of 70, which is supposed to be the good government group, I asked them. They said recording the gifts accepted by elected officials of any should be reported according to the laws in place. But we only know one of our contractors went. We have no idea if any of our members went. I know we're short of time, but this is the reason why people lose faith in democracy. This is why people don't mind someone like Trump saying he's going to be dictator for a day, because it's so vile and it's so disgusting.
Right. Lance, thank you so much for that. We are right up against it. So we'll see everybody next week on Hall Monitor.